Long musical intro. It's a classical gas. It's the only show on the interweb that has a theme song you can't listen to that's better than the show itself. So the theme song for the classical gas theme shows is Classical Gas from Mason Williams, and I can't play very much of it since I don't want to get sued. And I just play just enough to make you want to turn this off and go listen to that music, which is actually much better. So today we're just doing a very quick one. I kind of ran behind. I want to kind of keep up with the breakneck pace of the bathtub, because there's no point in taking baths unless you really keep up with the pace of bathtub taking. And I feel like I've been a little lax the past few days. We're going to do a quick one today on a lot of big books. We're doing classical gas with the very meticulously worked out logarithm of cognitive receptivity of great literature. It's a very, very carefully, closely worked out. You'd almost call it like an algebra of literary receptivity. We have three categories of reception to great books. Hell yeah, hell no, with the kind of fuck yeah up at the top. When the children aren't in the room, you can refer to the fuck yeah level. And that I do think the first novel of the Rougon-Marquardt series by Zola qualifies definitely as a fuck yeah. But all of the books, we're going to talk about two different writers who are kind of slightly contemporaneous. Zola, I read the third volume of the Rougon-Marquardt series. Please don't replay that to me when I get older. But that's the third in this series of this family. They're horrible scoundrels and rogues, and there's only one or two nice people in that whole family, and they're the ones who aren't successful or who die horribly. And it's about all the kind of rats and creeps. I read the third one, and I want to talk about Zola in the context of another writer I've always loved, which is Dickens. And think of them as kind of antithetical writers, because they're often placed as, as someone who wrote novels like a camera or a documentary writer, which I don't think is fair of Zola. He's a great novelist, but he was more realistic, whereas Dickens kind of created this huge imaginative landscape, particularly of London. And it's almost like a fantasy landscape when you read the Dickens novels. Anyway, the Kill, the third one in the third one in the series, we didn't talk about this one, did we? No. And this is about the brother of Eugene Rougon, who was the character in the second of the series. And this is a guy whose original name was, I can't remember, I think it was Aristide. I can't remember, but he changed his name to Sicard because he doesn't want people to know he's Eugene Rougon's brother. And he's basically a total crook who, after Louis Napoleon takes over, and all these kind of, basically the return of the Jedi. It's the return of not the return of the Jedi, it's the return of the Sith, or the revenge of the Sith. All the evil, rich people of Europe, of France, and all the aristocracy comes back and takes over this country. And they basically rebuild central Paris as this big, beautiful, grand boulevard. And it's just wealth. Everyone's making a fortune. And Aristide, or Sicard, makes a fortune as a real estate speculator. He doesn't do anything. He's the Donald Trump of his period, except more pleasant to be around. He basically would buy property and resells it to the government. And he has all these tricks for overinflating the price of his property. And it's just about all the families and all these different wealthy people making more wealth off each other. It is modern America. It's a terrific novel. This is the interesting part of the Zola series, and I just think these are incredible books, is each one is structurally and narratively very different. And this third one's a much more close it's kind of a domestic drama. You can really see Maupassant being influenced by Zola. I never knew this until I read Zola. But it's about this guy, this wealthy old guy. His wife dies, and literally on her deathbed, he meets this young girl with a big dowry who's pregnant, and he marries her and takes her money, and then spends his life trying to steal every nickel she's got, steals from everybody. She's a kind of Emma Bovary, but with a lot more money, character who's always has nothing to do with her life and is bored constantly and just wants to spend money on clothing. And she eventually has an affair with Saccard's son, and from his first marriage. And there's some great passages there of these kind of gardens that they have, this huge estate that they have, this kind of hothouse atmosphere. And so to call it realistic, I'm sure it is based on detailed observation from Zola, but he has a real gift for creating these incredible landscapes. And this is it's a little too long for me from some of the other books. The kind of collapse of the girl, I forget her name now, Louise, or I forget her name, but Renee, and the collapse of her marriage, and Saccard's loss of all his money, though he gets it all back, is good. So I just can't recommend him enough. And it kind of set me, for various reasons, it was fun to go back and read Dickens. And I started going back to Dickens for a totally different reason. I'm reading Ian Wilson's really good book, The Mystery of Charles Dickens, just came out. And it's time for a little bit of Manhattan. And he does he's the one that says, at one point, he says Zola was a camera and Dickens was more of an imaginative writer. And I don't know, when I read them, they're both writers who are just great writers. It's a very good book. It's a very good and informed book about Dickens. Wilson writes really clearly, and it's kind of a literary history that's made for bathtubs. It's not made for teaching in universities, and I'm enjoying it. It sent me to. It kind of reminded me of how Dickens' career had this kind of beginning of his career where these really comic, ridiculous, flamboyant novels of great humor, which I never really was wild about when I read Dickens. I always preferred the late stuff. I've talked about this on here before. David Copperfield is probably my favorite, one of my all-time favorite novels. This is one of my. I've mentioned this a few times, and I want to reread it at Christmas soon. All the Dickens should be read in the orange spine Penguin editions with those beautiful covers and the nice print, and also the nice reproductions of the old illustrations. With David Copperfield, the most autobiographical of Dickens's novels, it's where he starts to turn into sort of a darker streak. His earlier books have dark periods in them, like Oliver Twist and Nicholas Nickleby, where the evil people are coming up out of the woodwork, really, of London and of England. At the same time, there's a sort of a huge safety net of comic characters, and you just sort of feel like you're always going to be okay. David Copperfield is the first book where you can really see what happened to Dickens as a kid. He came from a really shabby middle-class family. His father was always running out of money. He went to debtor's prison. I won't tell the whole story, but at one point when Dickens was only 12, he was sent off to work really just child labor in a blacking factory, and he was on his own all week. And he went from this kind of a happy childhood to this horrible childhood, and then managed, with, unlike most kids that would have happened to come out of it. So he came out of it writing about these two worlds of Victorian England, the real merciless cruelty of that world. And you see it in the Trump government now. You can really, that cruelty towards people who don't have money. They deserve suffering. And that being on the receiving end of that is what Dickens understands. And he comes out of it about around the period of David Copperfield. And this is what I like about the Wilson book. He kind of focuses on a period in Dickens' life when Dickens' parents both died, and Dickens actually does cruel, horrible things to his wife. He dumps her in a house in Camden Town. And the cruel side of Dickens comes out, and it comes out in these kind of later dark novels, which I always kind of avoided. I'll be honest with you. I was not as interested in reading The Mystery of Edwin Drood, his last unfinished novel about a crime that's probably happened. It is a real atmosphere of great evil, of terrible evil, and there's not any of the really totally happy characters. Even David Copperfield and his Betsy Trotwood and all the people around him, there's essential goodness in them. It's hard finding any goodness in this last novel or in many of the late Dickens. But anyway, for the first time, I went back and read Edwin Drood and to the halfway point, which is when Dickens dies. And it's an extraordinary piece of writing. It made me really want to, it made you feel like Dickens was making another shift and if he had lived past 57 or whatever, he would have written some great books. Great bathtub read, very dark bathtub read. And it sent me to read the only Dickens novel up till now I have never read, the most famous and most well-received, Great Expectations. I always was put off by it in the same ways I was put off by this, because it didn't have that big, immersive feel of a kind of comic, big, vast comic novel. And every time I saw one of the David Lean version or the TV versions, it's a really disturbing book. This crazy old lady who's still wearing the wedding dress she was jilted in, waiting for some horrible crook to come marry her, and he pisses off with her money. It's Mrs. Havisham is a horrible character, and Estella, the young girl that Pip is paid to come play games with in front of Miss Havisham, is a horrible person. And Pip is kind of the most horrible central protagonist of any Dickens novel, where you really feel like Dickens is actually kind of knitting together that kind of this kind of benign, full of light world, and this really darker side that he clearly sees in himself in Great Expectations. I won't say too much more about the plot. It's one of the few of the Dickens books that people who hated Dickens, and he was disliked by many serious literary types in England over the centuries. They always they always spoke highly of this. It is a great novel, and I'm enjoying it in the bathtub. It all sends me back to want to go back to read, the kind of the David Copperfield, and I've mentioned it before, Bleak House, another one where you really have the darkness and the light of these vast, big novels are just they swallow you up, and you can just read them. You can read for just days without putting them down. Anyway, there's a little something on two great writers, considered very different writers, but I think everything I loved about them was they just were really terrific. They were dead. The books are 100 years old, and I couldn't put them down. The Kill, Emile Zola, The Mystery of EDWIN DROOD, Great Expectations. We're gonna run the calculus, and we're gonna go. Where's it gonna go? It's gonna go to hell yeah, with almost pushing towards fuck yeah on Great Expectations, which is really disturbing. But the picture of Pip and his sense of recognition of how horrible he is to people is really a great novel, and it's very modern, very modern. Watch out for Miss Havisham. Stay away from anyone who looks like Miss Havisham. And we'll talk. I'm going to come back in a few days because I want to do a piece very quickly about Brad Watson, and we'll do that in the next day or two. Okay, happy bathing. Stay safe. Listen to Classical Gas without me, and we'll talk to you soon.